If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Sun Tzu. But what happens when the greatest enemy isn't another army, but our own pride, fear, or impatience? We live in a world that tells us to hustle harder, speak louder, and never back down. But what if true strength isn't about fighting every battle, online, at work, or in our relationships? What if it's knowing which battles are worth it? He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight, Sun Tzu once said. In a time of endless noise and constant pressure, his wisdom reminds us, it's not a weakness to pause, it's power. Sometimes walking away takes more courage than pushing forward. Hello, peoples. Welcome to Calm Stories. Tonight, we are going to look at the teachings of Sun Tzu in a manner that was never done before. So stick around and be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you liked the video. In a quiet village located between mountains and rice fields, there lived a man who kept to himself. His name was Sun Tzu. He was no warrior, not yet. He walked with a quiet dignity, studying the winds and how they bent the bamboo without breaking it. He watched the farmers toil, not with brute force, but with rhythm and purpose. And in those silent hours, a question stirred in his heart. What makes a man win without fighting? Sun Tzu wasn't born a hero. He didn't grow up among royalty or soldiers. He wasn't given a sword or a throne. What he had was observation. He saw how pride led rulers to ruin, how armies fell despite having more men, more weapons, more wealth. And in these failures, he found his purpose, not to glorify war, but to understand it. Not to win through blood, but through wisdom. At the time, the land was fractured. Warlords clashed like thunder, leaving behind burnt fields and broken families. Young men were taken from their homes, women wept, and children grew up with war as their lullaby. Sun Tzu saw this suffering and knew something had to change. But who would listen to a quiet man with no army, no title? That's where the struggle began. Sun Tzu's teachings, now known as the art of war, were born not from bloodlust, but from heartbreak. He wanted to save lives, not take them. He believed that the greatest victory came not from fighting harder, but from avoiding the fight altogether. His first lesson was simple, yet powerful. All warfare is based on deception. To most, this sounded like trickery, but to Sun Tzu, it was deeper. It meant that strength lies not in brute force, but in knowing how to appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. To strike not where the enemy expects, but where he is blind. To move like water, shaping yourself to every challenge, flowing around resistance. These ideas came not from textbooks, but from years of silent watching, of farmers, animals, storms, and kings. He wrote, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." But Sun Tzu didn't always know himself. At first, he too believed that courage meant standing tall with a sword in hand, that to lead was to conquer. It was only after watching great leaders fall despite their strength that he realized courage without clarity is chaos. He had to reflect. He had to change. One day, he found himself standing at the edge of a battlefield, not as a soldier, but as a witness. Thousands lay dead, and yet the kingdom had gained nothing. It was then that Sun Tzu made a vow. He would write a guide, not just to war, but to life. A way for leaders to protect their people, not sacrifice them. A way for victory to come not through destruction, but through understanding. So he began humbly, with 5 simple foundations: the moral law, harmony between ruler and people, heaven, timing, seasons, and change. earth, distance, danger, and terrain. The commander, wisdom, sincerity, courage, and discipline. Method and discipline. Order, supply lines, and preparation. These were not just strategies. They were reflections of life. He saw that a leader must lead not just with commands, but with care. That the environment, timing, and morality mattered more than muscle. And so, the seed was planted. But Sun Tzu would still face doubt, resistance, and his own internal battles. This is just the beginning. Sun Tzu's words began to spread, first in whispers, then in echoes through the halls of commanders and scholars. But with every new idea comes resistance. Some called him a dreamer, others a coward. To suggest avoiding war in a time when kings measured their worth in land and blood was almost heresy. But Sun Tzu stood firm, not with anger, but with calm. His strength was quiet. Not the strength of shouting orders, but of understanding the winds before they howled. He knew that change never begins with force. It begins with clarity. And so he continued to write, not for fame, but for those who would listen when the world was ready. His next lesson was this: the general who wins the battle makes many calculations in his temple before the battle is fought. To Sun Tzu, victory wasn't about charging into chaos. It was about thinking, preparing, and anticipating. He believed that a battle was won long before the swords clashed, through strategy, patience, and deep self-reflection. This wasn't just about war, it was about life. He saw that we all live in a kind of battlefield. Every day we face decisions, challenges, opponents, some outside us, but most within. And just like in war, rushing in blindly brings ruin. But thinking with calm, acting with care, and preparing with precision, that is how we win. Sun Tzu began to look inward. He asked himself, when do I fight unnecessarily? What weaknesses do I hide behind anger or pride? Am I preparing, or am I just reacting? He realized something powerful. The enemy outside is often less dangerous than the chaos inside. Fear, ego, impatience. These were the generals that led most people to defeat. And so, he wrote more. One of his most heartfelt insights came not from watching armies, but from watching people argue in markets, neighbors feud, and families fall apart. He saw that in every conflict, both sides believed they were right, but both had forgotten to listen. He wrote, "Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." This wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. It meant being strong enough not to be provoked. It meant solving problems before they became disasters. It meant knowing that sometimes the best battle is the one you never have to fight. Sun Tzu knew the true test of a leader was not in how loudly they shouted or how many enemies they crushed. It was in how they moved like water, gentle but unstoppable, calm but powerful. It was in how they protected what mattered most without ever needing to destroy. He began to see that every part of war could teach us about ourselves. To know the terrain is to know your surroundings, your habits, your boundaries. To know your timing is to act not in haste, but with intention. To know your opponent is to understand before judging. The real transformation in Sun Tzu didn't come when he wrote The Art of War. It came when he realized that war wasn't always fought with swords. Sometimes it was fought with patience, with listening, with kindness in the face of insult, and restraint in the face of anger. He began to live differently. He didn't rise to every challenge. He chose his battles carefully. And when he did fight, it was never for ego, only for This was the battlefield within, and conquering it was the greatest victory of all. As Sun Tzu's teachings quietly began to shape the minds of those who dared to listen, his life shifted too. He was no longer just a man of ideas, he was becoming a man of impact. Kings began to summon him, not to lead their armies, but to guide their thoughts. He didn't arrive on horseback or in golden robes. He came with scrolls, silence, and a mind sharper than any sword. But his journey wasn't easy. One day, a powerful ruler tested him. "You speak of discipline," the king said, "but can you lead my people to war?" And with a challenge, he handed Sun Tzu a battalion, not of soldiers, but of palace women, courtiers who laughed at the idea of war. The king expected failure. But Sun Tzu did not shout. He did not scold. He explained the rules clearly, simply, with a calm voice. He repeated them. Then he gave the order. The women laughed again. And that was when Sun Tzu did something no one expected. He showed that leadership was not about popularity, but about principle. He followed through on discipline, and suddenly the laughter stopped. Order was born from confusion, respect from mockery. And the king finally understood. This man was not a philosopher of war. He was a master of clarity. This moment marked a shift in Sun Tzu's journey. No longer was he dismissed as just a writer. He was now trusted to lead not just soldiers, but minds. He taught that the heart of leadership lies in one truth. The good fighter wins first, then goes to war. The bad fighter goes to war first, then seeks to win. This wasn't just about armies, it was about all of us. How often do we rush into arguments, into projects, into decisions without truly preparing? How often do we move with impulse instead of intent? Sun Tzu taught that every action should follow understanding. That true power lies in preparation. He compared a wise strategy to the drawing of a bow. The tension, the stillness, the aim, only then does the arrow fly, and only then does it hit its mark. He wrote of energy, momentum, and timing, not as military ideas, but as principles of life. In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. He believed that chaos was not to be feared. In fact, it was the greatest teacher. In chaos, the proud stumble, the distracted fall, but the calm thinker sees clearly. He moves through confusion, not with panic, but with purpose. Sun Tzu had lived through storms of politics, of betrayal, of doubt. He had watched nations rise and crumble, and from all of it, he had learned that the greatest strength is not force, but focus, not dominance, but direction. He said, "Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt." It wasn't about being secretive, it was about being intentional. Don't speak of your dreams, build them. Don't warn your enemies, surprise them. Don't waste energy explaining. Let results speak. Sun Tzu didn't just teach strategy, he taught presence, awareness, listening deeply before moving swiftly. And in doing so, he began to transform. He was no longer a man reacting to a broken world. He had become the architect of a better one. A world where victory was measured not in battles won, but in peace kept. He no longer saw war as the path. He saw it as the last resort. And when that time came, he made sure to lead with the wisdom, not wrath. This was the tide turning, not in the world outside, but within the heart of the man himself. By now, Sun Tzu was no longer a stranger in royal courts. His ideas had traveled far, beyond borders, beyond weapons, beyond his lifetime. But what truly set his teachings apart was this: he never asked for worship, only reflection. At the core of his wisdom was a deep truth. Victorious warriors win first, then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. In that single line, Sun Tzu captured the essence of his transformation. He was no longer trying to change the world with force. He was guiding people, leaders, parents, warriors, thinkers, to look inward first, to plan, to pause, to truly understand what they were fighting for. But perhaps his most profound realization was this: appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. This wasn't just a strategy to fool an enemy, it was an invitation to humility. He believed strength wasn't loud, it didn't boast, it moved quietly, spoke gently, and struck only when absolutely necessary. And so Sun Tzu turned his focus to what could not be seen, the invisible forces that shaped every battle. Morale, discipline, unity, timing, terrain, the environment, the spirit of the people. He called these things heaven and earth, not as a religion, but as a metaphor. Heaven was the unseen, the energy, the seasons, the timing. Earth was the tangible, the land, the people, the choices we make on solid ground. He believed a great leader understood both. He wrote, "The general who advances without coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service for his sovereign, is the jewel of the kingdom." In a world obsessed with power, this was radical. He told leaders, do not crave credit. Do not fear being misunderstood. Do not lead for applause, lead to protect. He knew that victory earned through ego was fragile, but victory born of integrity, that lasted generations. One of his most touching insights was about his soldiers, not as tools, but as human beings. He wrote, "Regard your soldiers as your children, and they will follow you into the deepest valleys. Look upon them as your own beloved sons, and they will stand by you even unto death." To him, leadership was not command, it was compassion. Trust was not demanded, it was earned, and loyalty could not be bought with fear. It had to be nourished with care. Sun Tzu's philosophy became a mirror, not to show others, but to see ourselves. When do we lead from love, and when from pride? When do we listen, and when do we simply wait to speak? When do we choose peace, even when battle seems easier? In the final years of his life, Sun Tzu taught more than ever. Not through scrolls, not through speeches, but through presence. He would sit beneath a tree, children gathered at his feet, and speak of rivers and stones, of falcons and winds, of silence and how it holds more than shouting ever can. He had become the general not of armies, but of insight. He knew that most battles we fight are avoidable. Most pain comes not from others, but from our need to always be right, our fear of appearing weak, our craving to be seen. And so he ended his teachings not with weapons, but with stillness. The art of war to Sun Tzu had always been the art of balance, and finally, he had found his own. As the seasons passed, Sun Tzu grew older. The same hands that once wrote battle doctrines now folded gently in his lap. His words had reached far beyond any battlefield, into politics, business, homes, and hearts. His name became legend. But he never wanted to be remembered as a warrior. He wanted to be remembered as a listener, as a student of the world, as a man who asked, how can we win without hurting each other? And in the quiet moments of his final years, he often reflected not on war, but on change. He had seen the world shift from reckless conquest to calculated defense, from rage to reason. He saw leaders begin to adopt his teachings, not to dominate, but to protect, not to expand empires, but to preserve harmony. One of his final lessons, one that he whispered more than wrote, was, "The greatest victory is that which requires no battle." Sure as hell, he speaks truth in that. This was his true gift to humanity. He had spent his life not glorifying conflict, but trying to end it. To him, conflict was the last resort, a signal that something had already been missed, a failure of understanding, a crack in discipline, a moment where pride overcame patience, a difference between me and you, well, not technically. And so he taught people to see differently, that silence can be strength, that withdrawal can be wisdom, that flexibility is not weakness, but survival, that true courage is knowing when not to fight. These were the lessons that outlived him. In villages and palaces, on scrolls and stone, in classrooms and boardrooms, his strategies became a guiding star, not just for generals, but for anyone facing challenges, anyone seeking peace, anyone struggling to lead without losing themselves. Sun Tzu's transformation was not about becoming powerful. It was about becoming wise. He started as a man frustrated by the chaos of the world, a thinker who questioned the point of violence, a teacher who believed every person could lead with purpose, not pride. And he ended as something rare, a man who changed the world by refusing to become like it. Today, his words remain because they are not just tactics, they are truth. When we are overwhelmed, we can remember, opportunities multiply as they are seized. When we feel lost, we can return to, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. And when we are tempted to react, we can hold on to, he will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. In the end, Sun Tzu's greatest battle was not against armies. It was against the part of human nature that chooses pride over peace, noise over wisdom, and force over understanding. And that battle, he won. The moral of the story lies in Sun Tzu's life. It teaches us something powerful. You don't need a sword to be strong. You don't need a title to lead. You don't need to win every argument to be wise. The art of war is not about war at all. It is about peace. It is about mastering yourself so the world cannot master you. About seeing clearly in a world that often acts blindly. About leading with calm in times of chaos. Sun Tzu didn't just leave behind a book. He left behind a mindset, a way of being. The end. Good night, good luck for tomorrow, and come back for more. Till then, peace.